Hello, I'm Michelle Golightly, and I'm one of the USBE School Counseling Program Specialists. Today we'll be going over what you need to do to get prepared for your formal review and what you need to have in your evidence box. Before we dive into all the specifics about the review, I just want to go over this question which asks, is the school counseling program making a difference for students, and how can I prove it? This question should really be guiding our work all of the time, and especially as we prepare our evidence boxes for review, is to provide all of that information that shows the impact and difference that the school counseling program is making for students. So keeping that question in mind throughout, the first things we want to go over to lead up to the review is that evidence box. This is going to be due to the USBE specialist conducting the review about a month before. Make sure you share that with your district or LEA lead, and it can be either a Google link, a USB drive, however it's best for you, and just make sure it's before that deadline. Another thing that you're going to want to complete before the review is that performance self-evaluation. Make sure you have the most updated copy. You're going to download that, save it and complete the fillable PDF, and make sure that you put it in that assurances folder as part of the school counselor checklist. So on the day of the review will be led out by the school counseling program specialist assigned to your school, but there are going to be a lot of other people in attendance that day. The whole school counseling team, your administration, district leadership, CTE district leadership, and anyone else that you see as a benefit to this conversation. This might include your Career Center coordinator, if you have a Utah College Advising Corps advisor, a scholarship coordinator, a work-based learning coordinator, anyone who can add to this conversation. So how long should you plan for the review to take? It should be 1.5 to 2 hours, and this should be dedicated time that everyone can be in the room for this conversation. So as we get to the day of the review, you will already have submitted your evidence box about a month before, along with that performance self-evaluation. The only other thing you'll need that day is just be prepared to have a conversation that's open and transparent about all of those documents you submitted. So we'll start off with the administration setting the stage for about 10 minutes. They can talk about the school, the counseling center, how they work together, and then we're going to go through the standards in order, but we'll see where the conversation takes us. It doesn't have to be rigid to go through all of the standards. So what do we want to have you walk away with is that you have a reflective experience and you walk away with some meaningful goals and ideas for continued growth and improvement. We really want this to be a positive experience and a way for you to build your school counseling program and your individual capacity. So during this conversation, there's going to be a couple of big ideas that we're going to keep coming back to. So the first one would be to have any questions that we had about the evidence box be answered. We're also going to be having conversations about how the school counseling program goals align with the overall school goals, having a connection between how your data analysis informed your decisions in programming, as well as understanding how the school counseling program framework gets applied in your specific school, as well as the student outcomes that you were able to see through the evaluation and your intentional practices. So now that we've covered some information about the formal review, let's switch gears to talk about that evidence box. Now there are a couple of questions that come up often that I want to review before we jump into the specifics. The first is, how should the evidence be presented? This is a question that you get to answer based on what works for you and your team. If you use graphs, if you use a written narrative, however you collect your data and track that is the format that you can use. It's really up to you, whatever makes the most sense for your team. So if a document supports more than one standard, where should I put it? Put it in the standard that makes the most sense to you. Do not duplicate any documents. We don't want you to create more work by putting your documentation in multiple standards. Put it in the one that makes the most sense, and we'll be able to find it during our thorough review of the evidence box. What items need a 3 years worth of evidence? That's going to be answered here in just a moment on the next slide. What about this archive folder? What is it for, and do we review it? We don't review that folder, and that's really for you to house your historical documents, something that you might need to go back to see what you were doing in previous years. And so it's really a folder for you to kind of keep that record of the school counseling program. And so where do we find the USBE supporting templates? Everything is on our school counseling program website, and we will have the link to that at the end of the presentation. So as that question asks, there are a couple of items that need 3 years worth of evidence in your evidence box. These include your last 3 performance self-evaluations, the annual board presentations, and anything that has to do with a meeting to show consistency. So this could be your program leadership and management meetings, team meetings, department meetings, advisory, school improvement, any meeting that we want to make sure that has been consistently held over the last 3 years, your time task analysis, your data projects, and just any presentations or other data that would be useful to see 3 years worth. Everything else can be the most up-to-date copy of what you're currently using in your program. So before we dive into the specific standards, just note that this guide is not an exhaustive list of the evidence that you may want to add to your evidence box. It's up to each school counseling program to determine what documentation is necessary, where you will provide some suggestions, but it's really up to you to submit what will show that your program is fully functional. And again, duplicating files within multiple standards is not necessary. So here's an example of how to organize your electronic evidence box. So you'll notice that there is a folder for each standard as well as for the assurances. This is the way we'd like to see these organized, so it makes it really easy to know which standard we're looking at. And then you'll notice that under assurances, each of the individual elements also have their own folder. So a really simple and straightforward way to organize your evidence box. So now we're just going to go through each of the standards and talk a little bit about what you would include in your electronic evidence box. So the first standard, standard 1, is each student. So the program elements are designed to recognize and address the diverse needs of each student. So the access, attainment, and achievement data are used to guide the school counseling program. So you are going to be looking at how to reach each student as an individual by disaggregating that data by different groups. You're then going to take that information to modify your program implementation based on those gaps. So in this standard, we're really looking for what does your data look like and how have you analyzed that and what are you doing to reach those students and address those gaps. So some examples of evidence would be anything that you have with disaggregated data across time and information from your SOAR report. So now that we know who our students are, Standard 2 is taking that data and looking at how effectively are we using it and how are we able to improve our program with that. The big piece of data from this is your systemic assessment. That needs to be completed every 3 years, and that's going to include information from students, from parents, and from teachers. From that, you need to analyze that data and identify the needs of the students as well as any gaps based on the data analysis. So the example data would be obviously the systemic assessment, your SOAR report, SHARP survey, and anything from your school data summary. So the big intention with this is not that you give the survey and have that data, but then you take that survey data and you analyze those results to identify those gaps, to use that information to make your program goals and to modify the school counseling program, and making sure that you're using that data in a way that informs your program and improves your program so that it can improve outcomes for students. So Standard 3 is the Plan for College and Career Readiness process. So this is all of your PCCR work. In this evidence box standard, you're going to have the documents that you use for each of these meetings, and you'll also be able to indicate whether you have individual or group meetings for each grade level. And you're also going to make sure that this plan is connecting to other areas. So this would be other things like their non-academic well-being, talking about college affordability, exploring their options like using keys to success, as well as going through the post-secondary admissions process and their academic course planning for a CTE completer or concentrator options. So in Standard 4, we're looking at career literacy, and this is providing career literacy assistance to each student to make informed decisions about choosing a career and next step planning to reach their goals. So in 7th and 8th grade, this would be things like the College and Career Awareness class. In other grades, it might be working with your Career Center or CTE coordinator to give students information about different CTE pathways and how that connects to their career. Keep in mind that this should happen multiple times during each grade level. Next, we have Standard 5, which is Collaborative Classroom Instruction. In this standard, you're going to show how you work collaboratively with teachers to implement the curriculum that aligns with the Utah Mindsets and Competencies and the identified needs of students. In this standard, you're going to have your curriculum delivery survey results, and this is one that is conducted every 3 years. Similar to the systemic assessment, we're looking for more than just the results. We want to see that analysis of how those results were used to inform the program and align with the curriculum you're teaching and what the teachers are already teaching in their classrooms in regards to the mindsets and competencies. So some of the data we might see would be a lesson plan and results report, the mindsets and competencies action plan, as well as the curriculum delivery survey analysis. So next we have Standard 6, which is a systemic approach to dropout prevention with social emotional supports. So through a tiered approach, you should be addressing the immediate academic and non-academic concerns and identify needs of all students through an education-oriented and programmatic approach. This is also going to be in collaboration with existing school programs and coordination with school, family, and community resources. So this would be things like your RTI and MTSS process, any prevention work that you're doing, as well as the intervention work you're doing, along with the data that supports those interventions and implementations. Things also included in this area are your small group counseling, as well as any materials that you use in those groups. Standard 7 is alignment, which is the communication, collaboration, and coordination with the K-12 feeder system. So in this standard, you will have your minutes and agendas from any cone or feeder meetings. We are going to be looking to have 3 years of that so we can see that those meetings are happening consistently. Other data might be school transition presentations or school crosswalks. So finally, we have the assurances. And like I mentioned at the beginning, a subfolder for each of these assurances are required. So this is all of the structural components, the administrative assurances, the program leadership and management. So some of these you will need to get from your district or LEA lead. And these are other things like your budget, your website, a crisis plan, permission to counsel forms, that principal counselor agreement that you do annually, as well as all those minutes from any meetings that count under program leadership and management. And the second half of the assurances include the time allocation, where you'll have that time task analysis, as well as your professional development, including working on the College and Career Readiness certificate, as well as participating in updates and essentials, as well as your school counselor checklist, where you have your program self-evaluation, and you will have 3 of those. Now we're going to just go through some example documents that you may want to include in your evidence box. So in this first example, we're looking at some enrollment data, and you can see that they have disaggregated that, and they have some information on gender as well as ethnicity. Here are some examples of aligning the school counseling program goals with the school improvement goal. So here we have an example of some data analysis where this program took the results from their surveys of parents and students and teachers, and then looked at their time task analysis to see that there was a need, and then they made a plan to address that need. And so you can see that they've kind of put all of that information together in a really cohesive way. So here we have an example of a meeting agenda, and you'll be able to see all of the information that they talked about in that meeting, as well as their next steps. So here we have an example of the collaborative classroom instruction. You can see what activities were happening at each grade and at what point during the school year. So here's an example of a worksheet that was given out to students to help them plan for college and apply to college. And it has a lot of information on there. So this is a great example to put in that standard 3 in their plan for college and career readiness. So this example, we have some college and career readiness data, and you can see that they've broken it down by counselor to see how many meetings each counselor was having, the total number of meetings, as well as information about what topics that the students wanted to learn more about. So here we have a pathway plan example, and this would align with students making that 4-year plan as well as connecting that plan to their career goals. So here again, we have another example of that collaborative classroom instruction plan. So you can see that they have the different topics and the different grade levels so that you can see what's being addressed in this standard. So here we have some information about a career cafe that a school counseling program did. So they included their communications with their presenters, the occupations that students were interested in learning about, as well as the speaker questions that they gave to students. So here's an overview of a study skills group. So this might be a small group, and so you can see what was discussed at each session. And here we have an example of something that might be given out to students or posted, as well as the different supports that are available at each tier level, and an intervention map to show what was happening at each level. So that was only a few examples of what you might include in your evidence box. So additional support documents can be found on the School Counseling Program website. All of those supporting templates are there for you to download and to use. So this was a very brief review of the formal review process as well as the type of evidence to have in your electronic evidence box. So please feel free to contact either of us with more questions that you might have so that you can feel confident and prepared for your formal review and have a really great experience and come away with positive goals for the future.